In 1981, a 10-year-old named Christyne Anne spent the summer with her cousin in West Virginia. She claims that during that visit, she saw an overly large dog standing upright and intelligently watching her. She says that that one experience turned into a lifelong stalking by the Dogman. Hello, and welcome to Rope. If you're new here, all we do is search the world for the things that most people say should not exist, and then we share our research with you. Amy is an exceptionally good researcher, and we never share anything unless there are solid sources to back it up. And then I share her findings as professionally as I can, and in story fashion, in hopes that it will make it more compelling to listen to. If you're into that sort of thing, then please subscribe and follow our journey. Stories about the Dogman have been around for thousands of years, making their way through the centuries of being passed down from culture to culture, and in modern times, they seem to be just as prevalent as ever. I'm sure that you've heard the stories surrounding Bray Road in Wisconsin, like the account of Doris Gibson. She was a lady who was driving down Bray Road when she was suddenly attacked by a strange creature from nowhere. Her nightmare happened on Halloween night, 1991, when she felt a sudden bump beneath her tires. Afraid that she might have hit something, or maybe worse, someone, she stopped the car and got out to check. It was dark, so she had to walk to the end of the car to see where she had just driven. She looked down the road, but at first she didn't see anything. And then suddenly, this creature just appeared out of nowhere.
Here comes this thing, and it's just running up at me. It was no dog. It was bigger than me.
She said that when she saw it racing toward her, she immediately made a mad dash to get back inside of her car. She barely made it into the driver's seat and closed the door before the creature either slammed hard into the back of the car or started attacking the back of the car.
I just put my foot on the gas pedal and I started going. I've never seen a human run like that, and my uncle was a track star.
Doris got away, but she firmly believes that if she hadn't, she most certainly would have been dinner. Then there's the case of Lori and Rizzy. In the fall of 1989, she was driving home when she noticed something odd on the side of the road. She said that it looked like an animal with its back toward her. She drove by slowly enough to get a really good look at it, and the first thing that she noticed was it had pointed ears. As she continued to drive, she saw the creature from the front. But it was the strange position that it was in that really got her attention.
It was kneeling. Its elbows were up and its claws were facing out, so I knew it had claws. I remember the long claws.
She said that the beast was holding a chunk of flesh, what she thought was roadkill, up to its mouth and feeding off of it. She was surprised that as she passed, the creature wasn't startled into running away like most animals would be, but instead, it turned its head all the way back and looked at her with some sort of eerie, knowing gaze. She said that it had dark brownish gray hair and it was about the size of an average man. During the last century, there have been thousands, maybe tens of thousands of these reports, so many so that the scientific community and the skeptics ask, well, if the Dogman truly exists, then why don't people ever find any solid physical evidence for it? Evidence of a canine species that walks upright and has been seen by thousands should be easy to locate. At the very least, there should be bones of the creatures who have died. But as of the date of this recording, there's not a single shred of physical proof that the Dogman truly exists. Most skeptics just close the door right there. But through the years, avid believers have come up with a myriad of different reasons why physical evidence hasn't yet been found and may never be found. Some of them are based on the idea that the Dogman is just too smart to be discovered. And if that's the case, well, then the Dogman would have to be at least as smart as humans, right? Smart enough to hide their remains, navigate the world without being seen, stay off the radar. Interestingly enough, many people who say that they've encountered this beast report that they've seen intelligence in its eyes. Off the top of my head, I think of the Palmyra incident. I'm sure that you've heard of that one, where the family huddled together, terrified on the second floor, as these strange, dog-like creatures gazed up at them intelligently from the yard below. Amy actually contacted and spoke with Shelley Martin for a possible future episode. Shelley Martin is the woman who went through that horrific experience. And while on the phone with Shelley, Shelley said that she has no doubt these creatures are intelligent, and she believes evil. In this video, we're going to consider the possibility that the Dogman is indeed real and is highly intelligent, and we'll do this by following the story of Christyne Anne. Christyne Anne is a woman who claims to have been tormented by an intelligent, fierce canine creature her entire life. Her nightmare began when she was just a child, and it continued for decades. It got so bad that she finally wrote a book about it. We'll follow her story as she shares it in her book, Nightmare in the Woods. We'll take you from her first horrifying encounter, deep inside the West Virginia forest, when she was only 10 years old, to the moment 32 years later when she found herself face to face and looking eye to eye with a demented, dog-like beast, and only separated from it by a thin pane of glass in her living room window. Her encounters are pretty intense. And then we'll take a step back in our fact or fiction section at the end of the video. And there, for the first time ever, and maybe the last, I'm going to share with you a little of what Amy does when she researches these types of reports. The level that she goes through just might surprise you. And then stick around for the interview that I had with Amy. She was actually able to get in contact with Christyne Anne, and she had an hour-long conversation with her about her experiences. And when we get there, she'll share part of that conversation with you. And I asked her, after talking with Christyne Anne, what her gut feeling told her about Christyne's honesty. She'll share that as well. So this story begins in the summer of 1981. Why a creature, the Dogman nevertheless, would follow a person for decades across the country is a puzzle. Perhaps little Christyne Anne never should have left Arizona. Arizona has a diverse topography, but much of it is flat and wide open, and the climate is dry. The skies are usually blue with fluffy white clouds, and many say that there's a refreshing feeling of openness, potential, and opportunity in the air. Young Christyne Anne lived in Arizona with her family, and she was used to this feeling of wide open spaces. But then, in the summer of 1981, she was sent back to visit her cousin Sarah in West Virginia. Sarah was tiny and lived with her husband Nick, who was a bear of a man, standing well over 6.5 feet tall with a huge chest and broad shoulders. The couple lived in a single-wide trailer quite a ways from town on a plot of land that was filled with farm animals and surrounded by an extremely dense forest. For Christyne, the visit was a culture shock to say the least. The flat open areas that she was used to were gone, and they were replaced by tree-covered hills and a dingy gray cloud cover that stretched from hilltop to hilltop, like a dark canopy blocking out the rest of the world. The air was much thicker as well, and all of these elements together made her feel a bit claustrophobic. Nevertheless, she was excited to visit her cousins. One morning, Christyne got up early and she asked if she could go exploring in the woods. Sarah said that she could go, so long as she took the family's German Shepherd, Thor, and didn't wander too far off. So, happy and excited to investigate the forest, she and Thor bounced out of the house and headed for the tree line. At first, she did stay near the house, just wandering right beyond the edge of the woods, remaining in earshot in case Sarah called for her. She dove deeply into examining everything, looking under rocks, peeling the bark off of the trees, and using sticks to dig in the mud and look for bugs. She quickly lost herself in the mystery of the forest, and as the day went on, she didn't realize it, but she unintentionally wandered further and further from the house, moving deeper and deeper into the woods. And several hours later, after the sun had traveled all the way across the sky, and the shadows from the trees were stretching just as long as they were tall, she stopped and took a look around. The view was the same from every angle, and she immediately realized that she was lost, and she was no longer anywhere near the house. The sounds of the forest were changing as well as the night bugs were getting louder and louder. And then Thor, who had previously had his nose in the dirt, suddenly looked up as if something had caught his attention. And at the exact same time, Christyne noticed this horrible stench in the air. She followed him as he moved toward what first looked like a large group of bushes directly ahead. As they got closer, however, she could tell that whatever this was, it wasn't just a collection of bushes. It was actually an intelligently designed structure of some sort. It was made out of sticks, twigs, branches, and other things from the forest, and the closer that she got, the stronger that odor got as well. And then, for just a few seconds, the forest felt completely quiet. And suddenly, a distant yell broke the silence, and it startled her. Curiously, she turned her head toward the sound, and that was when she saw the beast for the very first time. Christyne and Thor were standing directly in front of a large, intelligently made structure in the middle of the woods when a distant voice broke the silence. It sounded like Nick was calling out, searching for Christyne. And when she turned her head to look, she saw a horrifying canine creature.
There, just off to the left, standing on its hind legs, was the biggest dog I had ever seen. I tried not to scream or run. It tilted its head to one side, like it was studying me.
Nick called out again, and this time there were other male voices shouting her name as well, and the calls were getting closer. This provoked an odd response from the creature. Instead of being startled by these voices and running off, or maybe quickly attacking the little girl and trying to drag her off into the woods, the beast seemed to ponder for a second. And then it slowly removed its gaze from Christyne and peered off into the direction of the voices. And after what appeared to be thinking for a moment, it shifted its eyes back to Christyne, lingered on her for a few more seconds, and then fled off into the woods. Christyne said that at that moment, her body just collapsed and she crumbled to the ground, crying in fear. And as she did so, she was once again reminded at just how horrible the area smelled. So as these voices were getting closer, she stood up and she resumed walking toward that horrible smell.
The closer I got to the smell, the worse it got. I was sure I was going to throw up before I saw what was causing that stench. Nothing could have prepared me for what I found. It was a den of some sort. I had seen animal dens before, but this one was bigger, much bigger. There was a fresh kill inside and a lot of old bones of other prey. I started crying again. It occurred to me then I just might have been in real danger.
A moment later, Nick and what appeared to be a small search party walked up on the den and startled Christyne. She spun around, saw Nick, and jumped up into his arms. Christyne later said that as the men studied the den, they acted extremely perplexed, and they were saying things like they had never seen anything like this before, and that this couldn't possibly be a normal animal's den. It was just too well put together, way too big. After spending quite a bit of time investigating the den, they took Christyne back to the house. She stayed quiet all the way back to the trailer, thinking that she never wanted to see anything like that ever again. Unfortunately for Christyne, her encounters with the Dogman had just begun. Later that evening, Christyne told Nick and Sarah what she saw. She said that it was a huge dog standing upright on its hind legs. She told them that it looked at her like a person looks at another person, nothing like an animal. And she said that it really scared her. And at that point, all she wanted to do was go back to Arizona. Nick and Sarah listened as she spoke, and they tried to comfort her. They told her that they really enjoyed her company and that they really wanted her to stay. They talked for most of the evening. Finally, Christyne said that she would stay, but she was not going back out into the woods. They all agreed, and that was that. Over the next few days, Christyne not only stayed out of the woods, but she never left the trailer. And after a week of being cooped up inside and being an adventurous 10-year-old brimming with boredom, she agreed that she would take some food to a neighbor named Miss Lambert. If she would have had to have gone through the forest, she wouldn't have went. But Miss Lambert lived right down the road, and the trip was in the opposite direction of the overly large dog's den that she had seen in the woods. Just as she was arriving at Miss Lambert's and was about to walk inside, she caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye. So she turned and looked, and when she did, she again was gripped with fear. Just at the edge of Miss Lambert's property, between her yard and the forest, she saw a large, dog-like creature positioned between two trees. It was standing upright and just staring back at her, intelligently. As soon as she saw it, she couldn't look away, and she instantly recognized its eyes. It was the exact same creature that she had seen a week ago in the woods behind her cousin's house. Christyne lost all track of time, and she didn't know how long she stood there staring at the creature before the door opened behind her. The sound startled her, and she spun around to see Miss Lambert smiling and inviting her inside the house. Christyne turned back around to the forest, but the beast was gone. Once inside, Miss Lambert offered her some refreshments, and the two visited for a while. And then at one point, Christyne asked if she could call her cousin to come pick her up. After her experience seeing that creature on the edge of her property, she didn't want to walk home. So she scheduled a ride. But unfortunately for Christyne, that would not stop the beast from getting to her first. While Christyne and Miss Lambert were eating sandwiches and drinking tea in the living room, a loud scuffling sound came from the front porch, and the two ladies stopped talking and just listened. It was quiet for a moment, but then there was more scuffling. The scuffling was very disturbing because no one was expected to be coming by at this moment, and the scuffling sounds were way too loud and way too purposeful to have been made by some small critter. The two ladies just sat there in silence as the scuffling continued, but eventually it stopped. They still listened for a few more seconds, but there was no more sound. So, just as the expression on the ladies' faces was starting to relax, Christyne looked toward the window, and that's when she saw the beast. And check this out. According to Christyne, it was looking in from the outside and intelligently scanning the house like a human would, and occasionally it was letting out a low mumbling growl as if it were talking to itself, planning something. Christyne said that she watched as all of the blood drained from Miss Lambert's face.
Just outside of the window was the monster. I tried not to scream. It was just watching us with a sort of smile on its face.
Just then, a car pulled up. The beast looked toward the sound and then ran off into the woods. A few moments later, Nick knocked on the door and he announced that he was there to pick up Christyne. Well, that was the last straw, as she demanded that she be sent back to Arizona. Shortly after that, she was back home, and before long, she was back in school. And for the most part, the memories of the Dogman just faded into the recesses of her mind. But every once in a while, whenever she was alone, she would get an eerie, unmistakable feeling that she was being watched. And whenever that would happen, she couldn't help but to remember those intelligent, piercing, canine eyes. And it always gave her the creeps. This feeling would come and go, but it never really completely went away. As she grew up, she never moved out of Arizona, and eventually she got married, had 3 kids, and then later got a divorce. Now, up until this part in her life, she had always lived in well-populated areas, away from the woods, like Phoenix. But then, one day, she moved in with a friend, an elderly lady named Miss Edwards. Miss Edwards lived out in the country, and it was while she was living with Miss Edwards that her next terrifying encounter would take place. The date was Monday, May 13th, 2013, and Christyne was driving home from a friend's house around 11:30 at night. The sky was overcast, and there was no moon out, so it was exceptionally dark. In her book, she said that she was in her neighborhood and she was about to pull into her drive when a herd of deer came rushing out of the woods and ran directly in front of her truck. So she immediately slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop. The deer flew by just inches from the front of her truck and she avoided hitting all but the last one. Unfortunately, that one hit the corner of her truck. Now, this incident flooded her body with adrenaline, and although it was extremely nerve-wracking, it would pale in comparison to what happened next. Now remember, it was dark, and Christyne was alone, so this next part must have been terrifying. Christyne had just slammed her truck into a deer, but before the deer even had a chance to drop to the ground, something with long bony fingers and long nails that reminded Christyne of a raccoon grabbed a hold of the deer and lifted it into the air.
I just watched in horror. It was dark out and no moon, but I could tell. It had a huge snout and pointed ears. Its head reminded me of a German shepherd's or a wolf's head. As it picked the deer up into its arms, it rolled its reddish eye back and stared directly at me. It was unnerving. It looked like it was sending a silent message.
Christyne sat behind the wheel, petrified, as this creature stared at her with this look of knowingness. And all at once, she was 10 years old again, and she was back in those West Virginia woods. And then, with its eyes still locked onto hers, it slowly pulled the deer up to its mouth. And never breaking eye contact, it took a huge bite out of the deer's neck. Well, that was enough for Christyne. She said that at that moment, she screamed and then threw the truck into reverse and slammed on the gas. She later noted that she didn't even look in the rearview mirror, and had someone been behind her, she would have slammed directly into the front of their vehicle. The following Friday, May 17th, Christyne's roommate, Miss Edwards, had her own terrifying encounter. Christyne said that she was asleep in the upstairs bedroom when she heard Miss Edwards, who was downstairs, screaming in terror. Well, Christyne jumped up, ran downstairs, and she quickly found Miss Edwards in her bedroom, backed all the way up against the wall, staring at the window. Christyne asked her what was wrong, and Miss Edwards said something that Christyne was half expecting to hear, but didn't want to. She said that she had just seen a werewolf right outside of her window. Well, anxiety instantly gripped Christyne's entire body. Somehow, the Dogman was following her. It was silent for a few moments as the two ladies just huddled there together, and then finally Christyne worked up enough courage to go to the window and look outside. It was dark, but she could see far enough to tell that there was no sign of the Dogman. Miss Edwards insisted that they call the police, and 10 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy arrived. He made a full report, but with no evidence of a werewolf, he left. One can only imagine what he did with that report once he walked out the door. The next morning, Christyne said that she found huge canine tracks outside and 2 completely shredded window screens. Just 4 days later, on May 21st, 2013, the creature returned. Christyne had sat up watching old movies until about 1 a.m., and just before bed, she stepped out onto the porch to have the last cigarette of the day. She said that the night was hot and muggy, and just as she was pulling the cigarette out of the pack, she heard something out in the blackness. So she stopped and she focused in on the sound. An instant later, she said that she could tell that something was running hard and fast directly toward her. So she abandoned the cigarette and immediately went back inside and locked the door. And the very moment that she closed the door, something slammed hard onto the other side. So hard, in fact, that the vibration pushed Christyne back a couple of steps. And for the next few minutes, she just stood there, listening to the beast as it moved around her porch on the other side of the door.
It was howling, huffing, and scratching at the door. I inched over to the lower part of the window, and what I saw sent my body into a state of panic. It was a werewolf. Its head was like a German shepherd's or wolf's. It had a bulky body, and it was covered in black and silver fur. Its paws were not paws, but hands with sharp claws. But its hind legs were the legs of any other dog. I watched as it began throwing things from the porch. It tossed my chair, then my table, and before long, all of my things were out on the ground. It must have sensed me watching it because it turned back to the window. Its eyes watched me through the glass. It moved eye level to me. We were literally eye to eye with just the glass between us. It smirked at me and then, for some reason, jumped off the porch. I stayed awake all night waiting for it to return, but it didn't. The next day, I cleaned up the mess and didn't tell anybody what had happened. And then the following night, it came to the door again. I cried from my bed, unable to process why this monster was hounding me.
These few encounters were all that Christyne could stand, and shortly after this, she moved out of this rural area of Arizona and back to the city. And although every once in a while she gets the feeling like she's being watched, as of the date of this video, and as far as this channel knows, Christyne hasn't seen the creature since. When Amy first shared this story with me, I have to be honest, the idea of a Dogman creature stalking a person for decades across the country sounded outlandish to me. But then I remembered, and I know this is going to make me sound just a little bit crazy, but I had a strange experience of my own when I was very young, and I'm not going to share it here, but it does make me wonder about this Dogman thing. What I saw was intelligent. So, was Christyne Anne's experience true? Well, we only have her word to go on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. It just means that there's no physical evidence, which is exactly where we started this report. We recently received a comment telling us that we weren't a true research channel and that we did shoddy work because we didn't wrap everything up at the end of our reports with an expert opinion, as many other channels like ours do. But trust me, that is not the hallmark of a channel that does good research. Amy does great research and on all of our videos, and we usually don't go into the details of that research as it really wouldn't fit the video and it'd be boring for each video. But just to give you an idea of what she does, I'll share just part of what she did for this video. After reading the book cover to cover, twice, making notes in dog-earing pages, she spent half a day calling several people in West Virginia, trying to locate anyone who could back up Christyne's childhood memory. She wasn't able to find anyone. Also, she pulled some strings with different auto insurance companies in the county that Christyne lived in May of 2013, and she searched for anyone hitting a deer on the 13th, and she didn't find any claims. She even called the sheriff's department in the same county for the same month to see if anyone reported seeing a werewolf on the night of the 17th. The records department worked with Amy, searching this report from every different angle. They searched by date and time, the author's name, the location, the roommate's name, and even and especially by words like werewolf and dogman. But nothing came up. The office said that they just do not have a report for that night for anything that even remotely resembles a dogman sighting. But none of that means that this did not happen. Christyne's visit to West Virginia happened 43 years ago, so it's not surprising that Amy didn't find anything there. And Christyne never said that she filed an insurance claim when she hit that deer. And as far as the werewolf complaint goes that the two ladies made to the sheriff's department, well, I think that there's a fair chance that they tossed that report out probably the moment that they walked out the door. Amy does this type of research on every single one of our reports. And whenever we find any pertinent information, we always share it with you, like this next part. Along with doing the research that I just mentioned, Amy also located Christyne's phone number. And she called her, and she had an hour-long conversation with her. So, this is the second time that we've sat together where you've shared deeper insights into our reports, and we do it face-to-face. Are you excited?
Yeah, and nervous.
Yeah, me too. You know, I think I've finally gotten past the nerves when I'm in the studio alone looking at the camera. But for some reason, having the cameras from the sides, it still kind of gets me nervous.
Yeah, it's unnerving.
So let me ask you this. You actually called the sheriff's department and you asked them, you inquired about someone who actually filled out a report that they saw a werewolf. What was it like talking to the sheriff's department about something like that?
Well, at first I thought that they were giving me the runaround. I mean, you know, from their point of view, here's this crazy lady calling about a werewolf encounter from like 10 years ago.
Right. So what exactly about the phone call conversation, though, made you think that they were giving you the runaround? Like, what did they do?
Okay, so the first time I called, they said, oh, well, the records department person has just left for the day. So I was like, okay. I called the next day. They said, the records lady isn't in right now, but we'll have her call you back. And so I was surprised because she actually called me back and she was really helpful. I mean, she stayed on the phone with me while she searched all these records.
Yeah, I remember. So, but you also spoke with Christyne Anne too. What was that like?
It was great, right? To be able to have her actually answer the phone and talk to me. But I want our viewers to know, first off, that on her Amazon About the Author page, it says, from her own writing that the book is mostly true, but partly not. And so I was like, I've got to find out what is the partly not.
Right.
So that's the first thing I asked her. And she said she just changed the names and some of the locations because she didn't want people to get upset with her giving out personal information. But the Dogman parts, she said, those are all true.
So, but when you were talking with her, did you believe her? What she was telling you?
Right. So she seemed really genuine. The more we talked, the more she got into talking about her encounters. It sounded completely like she was speaking from her memories, not making anything up at all.
What does your gut feeling tell you? Like, you're going back and forth, and you sounded really genuine. When you got off the phone, when you hung up, do you believe that do you believe she was telling the truth?
I do think she's telling the truth. Now, as you know, I don't know. I have no evidence that these encounters actually happened. But in talking with her for, almost an hour, I believe that she believes these incidents happened.
So you believe that she believes it. But as far as whether or not it happened, no one knows, right? But you believe that she honestly believes this stuff happened.
Right. Exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, what do you think? Is the Dogman real? And if so, why hasn't anyone ever found any evidence? Some of the people believe that the Dogman, or the werewolf, is the result of a curse, changing normal men into canine creatures who then change back again before they die. Could this be why no one has ever discovered any Dogman bones? That makes me think of the Romasanta case from the 1800s. Romasanta was a traveling salesman, and then he became a travel guide for women and children in the mid-1800s. Strangely, some of his customers disappeared while he was leading them to their desired destinations. Later, he was arrested for their murders, but during the trial, he claimed that he only committed those killings as a wolf from the result of a curse. It is an extremely fascinating story because there are actual court documents where he gives testimony and then a doctor comes on the stand and he gives his opinion of the medical condition that maybe Romasanta has. The world is divided. Most believe that Romasanta was actually one of the world's first serial killers in modern times, but some actually believe that he truly was cursed, and he killed his victims only as a wolf. We did a complete report on this, and if you'd like to see it, it's here.
All right, I'll go first.
All right.
Thanks for watching. We really enjoy making these videos for you.
And if you enjoy watching them, please share them with a friend. Thank you.